Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Courtside View Webcast. This is Tribune sports editor Joe Walljasper alongside Tribune basketball beat writer Steve Walenitk. Steve, a lot of second guessing will always go on when a team loses games.
Particularly like Tuesday night.
Like Tuesday night's game is a good example. Missouri 1-7 on the road, so I think we kind of should take a look at maybe the game management of some of these road games where things have gone wrong. Just give your thoughts on the way Mike Anderson has managed these games, especially when you're talking about road games where foul trouble is an issue.
Well, I think it was interesting what happened on Tuesday in Nebraska because Marcus Denman, who isn't a guy we've seen get in foul trouble all year long, he's really, in fact, the Kansas State game on Saturday was a really physical game, and he didn't get his first foul until about 6 minutes to go or something. But he got two quick fouls in the first half and went to the bench with 13 minutes to go. And Missouri's offense really just shut down at that point. I think they scored 2 points over the next, 7 minutes or something. In that stretch, Lawrence Bowers, who is frankly Missouri's second best offensive option right now, was also hit with his second foul and sat. And this team really looked at a loss for what to do. And remarkably, because Nebraska was having all kinds of problems of its own, they never relinquished what was a 3 or 4 point lead, or maybe as many as 5 point lead in the first half until the last few minutes when Nebraska suddenly got hot. But I feel like with the way the Huskers were playing, if you leave those guys out on the floor a little bit more or put them back in when things aren't going well, you had a chance to really put some distance between yourselves and the home team. Instead, I think Nebraska gets confidence. They finish the half on a high note. And things never really got back in Missouri's favor. They took a brief lead in the second half, but I think that really did cost them.
And it's also, I think, you can kind of have this idea in your head, well, if someone gets 2 fouls in the first half, they sit out the entire rest of the first half, and that's the end of it. And that's a nice way to prevent yourself from having to do a lot of thinking, I think. And the same goes, if they get 3 fouls early in the second half, they're going to sit until late. But you can lose a game in the first half, and you can lose a game early in the second half. And I think you got to have a little more open-mindedness about, A, is this a player that's going to be fouling a lot? If it's a guard, you can probably get away with playing him. And B, if the game is slipping away from you, as it kind of was there midway through the Nebraska game, there's no real advantage into, okay, now we can play Marcus Denman in the final 5 minutes without concerns about him fouling out. By this time, you're down by 15 points. So I think with Denman especially, you can't really afford to have him off the floor for long stretches in a competitive game. And so I think that's where I would like to see a few changes. Then secondly, I think in the Kansas State game, almost all the big guys were in foul trouble, but none of them actually fouled out. You could, as they were getting really exploited in the second half, you could have, all right, Ratliff, get out there and hack your guy in 5 minutes, and then you take a seat, then Moore will do the same. And then, you could have kind of rotated them in there and let them. They weren't doing anything offensively, so that was part of the deal. But, I think they hadn't fouled out yet. You don't get extra bonus points for whatever fouls they got left at the end of the game.
Exactly, and then maybe Lawrence Bowers isn't gassed down the stretch of that game where he ends up playing 37 minutes. And most of that time he was the only big guy on the floor, so he's really doing all the grunt work under the basket. I know Kim English and Marcus Denman were trying to chip in, but if they were going to seal off the backboard, it was going to be Lawrence doing that almost single-handedly, and he obviously wasn't able to do it by himself, and also was not fresh for the stretch run when they needed him, and all of a sudden Kansas State's going on a 9-0 run. I think it was interesting on Tuesday in Lincoln that after sitting those guys for so long in the first half that the game seemed to be slipping away again midway through the second, and Mike Anderson pulled them off again when they both got their third fouls. He didn't pull them for long, and he got them back out there pretty quick. But in between, Nebraska got another 3-point shot and took an 8-point lead to 11, and Missouri was never able to get closer than 9 the rest of the way.
The other issue that, it's not really a coaching issue. Well, it might be. But Missouri is one of the worst teams at figuring out that one of their players is really hot and getting him the ball. And you can argue, as we have a little bit, that Marcus Denman needs to be more assertive. But I think there's a certain amount of coaching involved here that if you've got a couple possessions in a row where nobody's throwing the ball to Marcus Denman, A, you need to make it call a timeout and make it clear they need to get him the ball, or B, run some stuff for him. I mean, they run a motion offense, and that's good. I like it. I don't like to watch basketball where they're just running sets all the time. But I think if you got a guy who's as hot as he was and you're having as much trouble scoring as you did, whatever plays you got, now would be the time. There's no reason to save him. And I think that's another issue that Missouri has really held them back in the games they've lost this year. Just if your offense is struggling and you got one guy who isn't, why is it so complicated to get him the ball?
I think it is a coaching issue, because I think at some point somebody, and it has to be the coach, has to be the person to say to these guys,
pass him the ball or you're going to come sit by me.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the card that he has, and he hasn't played it very often. And you see at the beginning of the second half, Marcus single-handedly puts them back in the lead after trailing at halftime. He scores the first 8 points and then doesn't touch it for another 3 minutes.
It's mind-boggling.
And you know, I've actually come around to your way of thinking that Marcus doesn't need to be more assertive. Everybody else on the team needs to play like Marcus does. The guy's been remarkable all year at how efficient he's been, and I don't think you want to mess with that. It's the reason he's been as good as he's been all season long. But the problem is when he's out there being patient, looking for good shots, and passing up tough shots to other guys, those guys are then taking even tougher shots, and they have less chance of hitting them. And you know, we see these really long stretches where they just look terrible offensively, and that happened multiple times on Tuesday night.
All right, after we've completely beaten these poor guys to a pulp, if you'll join us for our next webcast, we'll talk about what their chances are of kind of salvaging some pride against Kansas this weekend.